You don't belong in this seat. Those were the 6 words that ended Brenda Vance's 20-year career in less than 5 minutes. It was supposed to be a routine red-eye flight from Chicago to D.C., but when a flight attendant decided that a man in a hoodie couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket, she didn't just break protocol, she broke the law. She accused him of theft. She mocked his ID. She even threatened to have him arrested. She had no idea that the man she was humiliating wasn't just a passenger. He was the very man sent to audit her airline's security clearance. And the badge in his pocket? It didn't just carry authority. It carried the power to shut the entire airport down. This is the story of how arrogance met federal justice, and the karma was absolutely brutal. The rain was hammering against the reinforced glass of O'Hare International Airport, creating a blurred grey curtain over the tarmac. Inside Terminal 3, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the stress of delayed passengers. Marcus Sterling adjusted the strap of his duffel bag on his shoulder. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a lack of sleep, but the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from 3 weeks of undercover field operations in Seattle. Marcus was a large man, standing 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal grey hoodie. He hadn't shaved in 4 days, and his eyes were red-rimmed. To the casual observer, he looked like a man who might work construction, or perhaps a bouncer heading home after a double shift. He certainly didn't look like a senior special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, holding a GS-15 clearance level that gave him access to rooms the president didn't even enter without an appointment. Tonight, Marcus wasn't working. At least he wasn't supposed to be. He was just a passenger on Flight 492 to Washington Dulles, heading home to his wife, Sarah, and their golden retriever. He glanced at his boarding pass. Seat 1A, first class. He had upgraded himself, using miles accumulated over a decade of government travel. He just wanted legroom, a glass of bourbon, and silence. Group 1, first class and active military personnel, you are welcome to board, the gate agent announced over the intercom. Marcus moved toward the jet bridge. The crowd was dense. A businessman in a tailored Italian suit, holding a Toomey briefcase, pushed past Marcus, bumping his shoulder. "Watch it," the man muttered, not even looking back, assuming Marcus was just loitering in the priority lane. Marcus didn't react. He was trained to de-escalate, to observe, to remain invisible until it was time to be very, very visible. He scanned his pass at the gate. The machine beeped green. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling," the screen read. He walked down the jet bridge, the sound of the rain intensifying as he neared the aircraft. He stepped onto the plane, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorway. Standing in the galley was the lead flight attendant. Her name tag read Brenda Vance. She was a woman in her late 40s with hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was currently chatting with the first officer, a man named Captain Richard Stevens. As Marcus stepped on, Brenda's conversation stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes flicked him up and down. She took in the scuffed Timberland boots, the faded jeans, the hoodie, and the unshaven face. "Good evening," Marcus said, his voice deep and polite. Brenda didn't respond immediately. She offered a tight, strained grimace. "Boarding pass?" Marcus held it out. Usually they just glanced at it. Brenda snatched it from his hand. She stared at it, then looked at the date, then looked at him, then looked back at the pass. "Seat 1A?" she asked, her tone rising in a way that suggested a question and an accusation simultaneously. "That's right," Marcus said, reaching for the slip of paper. She pulled it back slightly. "Sir, are you sure you didn't pick this up off the floor? This is a first-class assignment." The first officer, Captain Stevens, chuckled softly, leaning against the cockpit door frame, watching the interaction with amusement. Marcus felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. "I'm aware of what class it is. I bought the ticket. Can I have my pass back? I'd like to stow my bag." Brenda hesitated for a long, uncomfortable second before handing it back. She didn't say, "Thank you," or "Enjoy your flight." She simply turned her back to him and resumed talking to the pilot. "Unbelievable," Marcus heard her whisper as he walked past. "Standards are just dropping everywhere." Marcus walked to seat 1A. It was a window seat. He tossed his duffel into the overhead bin. As he reached up, his hoodie lifted slightly, revealing the leather belt at his waist. There was no weapon there. He had checked his service firearm in a lockbox in the hold to avoid the hassle of carrying it in the cabin while off duty. But the quality of the belt and the way he moved suggested a discipline that didn't match his clothes. He sat down, put in his noise-cancelling earbuds, and closed his eyes. "Just get me to DC," he thought. He had no idea that Brenda Vance was currently in the galley, tapping furiously on her manifest tablet, convinced that a crime was in progress. 10 minutes passed. The plane was filling up. The businessman who had bumped into Marcus earlier was now sitting in 1C across the aisle. He was sipping a pre-flight champagne and glaring at Marcus, clearly annoyed that his view was spoiled by someone dressed so casually. Marcus had his eyes closed, trying to drift off before takeoff. Suddenly, a sharp tap on his shoulder jolted him. He pulled out an earbud and looked up. It was Brenda. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was standing over him with her hands on her hips, blocking the aisle. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass again," she said loudly. The cabin went quiet. The ambient noise of passengers settling in seemed to drop away. The businessman in 1C lowered his glass. Marcus sighed, reaching into his pocket. "Is there a problem?" "We'll see," Brenda said. She took the pass again. "I've been checking our manifest. There seems to be a discrepancy." "A discrepancy?" Marcus asked, his brow furrowing. "I scanned in at the gate. The machine turned green." "Machines make mistakes," Brenda snapped, "and people manipulate machines." She held the pass up to the light as if looking for a watermark. "This ticket is issued to a Marcus Sterling. Is that you?" "Yes, that is me." "Do you have identification to prove that?" Marcus sat up straighter. This was escalating beyond a rude flight attendant. This was becoming harassment. "I showed my ID at TSA. I showed it at the gate. I am already seated. And I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft, and I have the authority to verify the identity of any passenger I deem suspicious," Brenda declared. She used the word suspicious like a weapon. "Suspicious?" Marcus repeated, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "Because I'm wearing a hoodie? Or is there another reason, Brenda?" He used her first name. She flinched. She didn't like that. "ID. Now, or I call the captain," she demanded. Marcus knew the drill. If he refused, he'd be kicked off for non-compliance. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted to go home. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He removed his standard driver's license, an Illinois state ID, and handed it to her. Brenda took it. She looked at the picture. She looked at Marcus. The picture was 3 years old. Marcus was clean-shaven and wearing a suit in the photo. "This isn't you," she said, tossing the ID back onto his tray table. It slid off and fell onto the floor. Marcus stared at the plastic card on the carpet. He didn't pick it up immediately. He looked at Brenda. "Excuse me?" I said, "That isn't you. The man in this photo is a professional. You..." She gestured vaguely at his attire. "You look like you hopped the fence at the perimeter." "That is a valid Illinois driver's license," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Pick it up." "I will do no such thing," Brenda scoffed. "And I'm not accepting a fake ID. I see these all the time. You probably bought it off some website so you could sneak into first class and drink free liquor." "Brenda," the businessman in 1C chimed in, leaning over. "He's clearly disturbing the peace. I saw him push through people at the gate. If he's got a fake ID, we shouldn't be flying with him. It's a security risk." Brenda nodded at the businessman, validating him. "Exactly, Mr. Henderson. Safety is my priority." She turned back to Marcus. "Listen to me. I'm going to give you one chance. Grab your bag, go back to economy, and take the open middle seat in row 34. If you do that, I won't call the police. If you stay here and keep lying about this fake ID, I will have you escorted off in handcuffs." Marcus looked at her. He looked at the passengers staring at him, some with pity, most with suspicion. He realized this wasn't going to end with a conversation. Brenda had already decided the narrative. Thug in first class steals seat. He slowly bent down and picked up his driver's license. He wiped it off on his jeans. "I'm not moving to row 34, Marcus said calmly, "because this is my seat, and that is my real ID." Brenda's face turned a violent shade of red. "Fine. Have it your way." She spun around and marched toward the cockpit. "Captain Stevens, we have a situation in 1A. Marcus took a deep breath. He reached into the inner pocket of his hoodie. His fingers brushed against the leather wallet that held his other credentials, the ones he wasn't supposed to flash unless absolutely necessary. He hoped it wouldn't come to that, but as Captain Richard Stevens emerged from the cockpit, adjusting his hat and looking like a man eager to throw his weight around, Marcus realized that absolutely necessary was about 30 seconds away. "What's the problem here?" Captain Stevens boomed, stopping at row 1. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the arrogance of someone who hadn't been told no since flight school. "He refuses to move," Brenda said, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus. "He presented a fake ID. He's belligerent. I don't feel safe flying with him." Captain Stevens looked down at Marcus. "Is that true, son?" "Son." Marcus looked the captain in the eye. "I am a paying passenger, Captain. Your flight attendant dropped my ID on the floor and is refusing to acknowledge my ticket." "Brenda has been with this airline for 20 years, Stevens said dismissively. "If she says your ID is fake, it's fake. Now get your bag. You're off the flight." "I'm not getting off," Marcus said. "Then I'm calling the airport police," Stevens threatened, pulling out his radio. "And when the feds get involved, you're going to wish you just walked away." Marcus almost smiled. "Almost." "Captain," Marcus said softly, "I think you should really think about that next move. Because if you call the police, this plane isn't taking off tonight, and you are going to lose your job." "Are you threatening me?" Stevens shouted, his spit flying slightly. "That's it. That is a federal offense. Threatening a flight crew." He keyed his radio. "Tower, this is Flight 490. We need airport police at the gate immediately. We have a hostile passenger in first class. Possible security threat." The cabin erupted in murmurs. People were pulling out their phones, recording. Marcus sat back. He watched them panic. He watched Brenda smirk, thinking she had won. He watched the captain puff out his chest. "Okay," Marcus thought. "You want the feds? You got 'em." He waited. He would let the police board. He would let them come all the way to his seat. He wanted the audience to be as big as possible when the hammer dropped. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers were already flashing against the fuselage of the plane, illuminating the rain-streaked windows. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air conditioning had been turned off to conserve power while the engines idled, and the first-class cabin was growing warm. Brenda Vance stood at the front of the cabin, arms crossed, tapping her foot. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she had already won. She made a show of apologizing to Mr. Henderson in 1C. "I am so sorry for this delay, sir. We just can't risk the safety of our premium passengers with riffraff on board. We'll get him out, sanitize the seat, and be on our way." "Sanitize the seat?" Marcus repeated from 1A. He didn't look up, but his voice carried. "You think I'm a disease, Brenda?" "I think you're a criminal," she spat back. "And in about 2 minutes you're going to be a prisoner." The jet bridge door opened with a heavy thud. 2 Chicago Police Department officers stepped onto the plane. They were followed closely by a TSA supervisor. The lead officer, a burly man with a buzz cut and a name tag that read Officer Kowalski, looked annoyed. He walked straight to the cockpit where Captain Stevens was waiting. "Who's the problem?" Kowalski asked, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. "Seat 1A, Captain Stevens said, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "Refused to show ID, refused to vacate the seat, and—" Stevens paused, looking at Brenda. He needed to make this stick. "And he made verbal threats against the crew. He said the plane wouldn't make it to D.C. It was a lie. A twisting of words, so severe it was criminal. Marcus had said the plane wouldn't take off because of the legal mess, not that he would crash it. But Stevens knew that invoking a threat to the aircraft gave the police probable cause to use force. Kowalski's eyes narrowed. He turned to the cabin, scanning for the threat. He saw Marcus, hoodie, boots, headphones around his neck, and the profile fit the description of a troublemaker. Kowalski marched down the short aisle, his partner, Officer Miller, flanking him. They loomed over seat 1A. "Sir," Kowalski barked, "hands where I can see them. Stand up. Now." Marcus didn't stand. He kept his hands resting openly on his knees, palms up. A gesture of submission, but his eyes were locked on Kowalski's. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, "before you put hands on me, I need you to listen very carefully. You are being used to facilitate a federal crime." "I said stand up," Kowalski shouted, reaching for Marcus's arm. "You are under arrest for interference with a flight crew and trespassing." "He pushed me too!" Brenda suddenly shrieked from the galley. The cabin gasped. Marcus's head snapped toward her. "He shoved me when he boarded," Brenda lied, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "I was too scared to say anything until you got here, officer. He's violent." That was the match in the powder keg. Officer Kowalski didn't wait for an explanation. He grabbed Marcus by the lapel of his hoodie and yanked. "Get up! You're done!" Marcus didn't resist the pull. He stood up, towering over the officer by 2 inches. He let them spin him around. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs graze his wrist. "Wait," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a command tone that cut through the noise. "Left inside pocket, my credentials. Check them, now." "I don't care about your fake ID," Kowalski yelled, snapping one cuff onto Marcus's left wrist. "It's not an ID," Marcus said, his voice turning into ice. "It's a badge, and if you put that second cuff on me, Officer Kowalski, you will lose your badge, your pension, and your freedom. Reach into my pocket. Look at the wallet." Something in Marcus's voice, the absolute lack of fear, the specific cadence of authority, made Kowalski pause. He had arrested hundreds of drunks and unruly passengers. They always screamed, begged, or fought. This man was doing none of that. This man was issuing orders. Officer Miller, the younger partner, looked nervous. "Jim, maybe check it?" Kowalski hesitated. He looked at Captain Stevens, who was nodding encouragement. "Cuff him. Get him off my plane." Kowalski gritted his teeth. "Fine, Miller, check the pocket. If it's a library card, I'm tasing him." Miller reached into the inside pocket of Marcus's hoodie. His fingers curled around a black leather bifold wallet. He pulled it out. It was heavy, heavier than a normal wallet. Miller flipped it open. The cabin lighting caught the gold shield embedded in the leather. It wasn't a standard police badge. It was a federal shield. Below it was a laminated ID card with a holographic overlay. Department of Homeland Security. Senior Special Agent Marcus Sterling clearance. Top secret. SCI Miller froze. He looked at the photo. It was Marcus. He looked at the badge number. "Jim," Miller whispered. His face went pale. "What is it? A fake?" Brenda asked, stepping closer, eager to mock him. Miller looked up at his partner. "Jim, take the cuff off. Right now." "What?" "Take it off," Miller hissed, shoving the badge into Kowalski's face. "It's DHS. He's a senior special agent. He's Internal Affairs Audit Division." Kowalski stared at the gold shield. The words Homeland Security seemed to scream at him. He looked at the handcuffs on Marcus's wrist. He looked at Marcus. Marcus's expression hadn't changed. He looked like a statue of judgment. "Unlock it," Marcus whispered. Kowalski fumbled for his key. His hands were shaking. The click of the handcuffs releasing sounded like a gunshot in the silent cabin. Marcus rubbed his wrist slowly. He took the wallet back from Miller and held it up, high, so the entire first-class cabin could see it. He turned slowly, facing Brenda Vance and Captain Stevens. "My name is Special Agent Sterling," Marcus announced, his voice booming without shouting. "I am the lead auditor for the Transportation Security Administration's Insider Threat Program. I was sent here to test the security protocols of this airline." He took a step toward Brenda. She backed up until she hit the bulkhead. "And you just failed," Marcus said. "Spectacularly." The silence on Flight 492 was absolute. You could hear the rain hitting the roof, but inside, nobody dared to breathe. The businessman in 1C, Mr. Henderson, slowly put his champagne glass down and tried to shrink into his seat. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't know. I looked like a black man in a hoodie?" Marcus finished the sentence for her. "And that was enough for you to accuse me of theft, falsify a police report, and lie about a physical assault to a law enforcement officer?" Brenda's face crumbled. I thought you were a threat." "No," Marcus said. "You are the threat." He turned to the police officers. "Officer Kowalski." "Yes, sir." Kowalski stood at attention, sweating profusely. "Secure the cockpit," Marcus ordered. "Captain Stevens is detained." "Detained?" Captain Stevens shouted, though his voice cracked. "You can't do that. I'm the captain of this vessel." "Not anymore," Marcus said. He pulled out his phone. "You just utilized federal law enforcement resources to file a false report against a federal agent to cover up a discrimination issue. That is a felony under Title 18, Section 1001. You are a security risk." Marcus dialed a number. He put it on speakerphone so the crew could hear. "Director's office," a crisp female voice answered. "This is Agent Sterling, badge 4992 Alpha. I need an immediate patch through to Assistant Director Davis at the Chicago field office. Priority 1. Hold, please." The hold music played for 3 seconds, a surreal, jaunty tune, before a gruff voice cut in. "Sterling, I thought you were off the clock. Why am I getting a Priority 1 alert from a plane on the tarmac?" "Director Davis," Marcus said, staring dead at Captain Stevens. "I am on Flight 4922. I have just been assaulted and unlawfully detained by the flight crew. The pilot in command, Captain Richard Stevens, and lead flight attendant, Brenda Vance, have fabricated a security threat to have me removed. I need a full grounding order for this aircraft immediately." "Are you hurt?" Davis asked, his voice hardening. No, sir, but I was handcuffed by CPD based on false statements provided by the crew. They cuffed you? Davis sounded incredulous. Jesus. All right, consider it done. I'm contacting the FAA tower now to pull their flight plan. I'm sending a tactical team to secure the aircraft and extract the crew. Do not let anyone leave that plane, Sterling. Copy that? Marcus hung up. He looked at Captain Stevens. The captain's face was grey. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that his pension, his license, and his freedom were dissolving in real time. You can't be serious, Stevens whispered. I made a mistake. Let's just talk about this. We are way past talking, Richard, Marcus said. You wanted the police? You have them. Marcus turned to the passengers. He saw the phones pointing at him. Ladies and gentlemen, he addressed the cabin. This flight is cancelled. This aircraft is now a crime scene. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we will have a new crew and a new aircraft for you within the hour. However, these two individuals, he pointed to Brenda and Stevens, will be leaving with the police. Officer Kowalski, Marcus said. Yes, Agent Sterling? Arrest them. On what charge? Kowalski asked, though he was already reaching for his cuffs, eager to get on the right side of this disaster. Interfering with a federal agent, filing a false police report, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Marcus looked at Brenda. And for Ms. Vance? Add assault. She claimed I pushed her. Since that is a lie, and she used it to weaponize the police against me, we're going to let a judge decide how to interpret that. Brenda let out a sob. I didn't mean it. Please, I have 20 years. And you just ended them in 20 minutes, Marcus said, cold, hard, and final, as Kowalski handcuffed the captain and Miller handcuffed a weeping Brenda Vance. The businessman in 1C, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. Agent Sterling. Marcus turned his gaze to the man who had cheered for his removal. I think I might have video evidence, Henderson stammered, holding up his phone. I recorded the whole thing. Just in case, you know. You need proof she lied. Marcus looked at the man with disdain. A coward who sided with power, now flipping to save his own skin. Keep it, Marcus said. The feds will be confiscating all phones for evidence shortly. You can explain to them why you encouraged the harassment. Henderson slumped back in his seat. A siren wailed outside, louder than the others. Through the window, the passengers could see black SUVs swerving onto the tarmac, bypassing the airport security gates. The doors opened, and men and women in windbreakers with DHS and FBI emblazoned on the back poured out. The cavalry had arrived, and for Brenda Vance and Captain Stevens, the nightmare was just beginning. The extraction of the flight crew wasn't a quiet affair. It was a spectacle. The main cabin door of the Boeing 737 was thrown open, not by a gate agent, but by Special Agent Jessica Thorne of the DHS Tactical Response Team. She was a striking woman with a terrifying demeanor, dressed in a navy blue windbreaker with Federal Agent stamped in yellow across the chest. Behind her were 4 armed agents, moving with the precision of a SWAT team. Agent Thorne stepped onto the plane, her eyes scanning the cabin instantly. She spotted Marcus standing in the aisle, rubbing his wrist where the handcuffs had been. She walked straight past the trembling Brenda Vance and the pale Captain Stevens without even acknowledging their existence. Agent Sterling, Thorne said, nodding respectfully. Director Davis sent us. We have the perimeter secured. The tower has grounded all outbound flights from this terminal until we clear the scene. Are you injured? I'm fine, Jessica, Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying a dangerous undercurrent. But we have a significant violation of Title 18 here. Deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to file false reports, and interference with federal duties. Thorne turned slowly to face Officer Kowalski and Officer Miller of the Chicago Police. The two local cops looked like children who had accidentally wandered into a war zone. "Officers," Thorne said, her voice crisp, "transfer custody of the suspects to my team immediately. You two are relieved, and I suggest you write your reports very, very carefully. If I find one discrepancy between your report and the witness videos, you'll be sharing a cell with them." Kowalski swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Understood." Thorne signaled her team. "Secure them." Two DHS agents moved in on Captain Stevens. The captain, who had spent the last 20 years being treated like a king of the skies, instinctively pulled back. "You can't do this!" Stevens shouted, his voice cracking. "I am the pilot in command. I have jurisdiction over this aircraft." "You have jurisdiction over nothing," one of the agents growled, grabbing Stevens's arms and forcing them behind his back. The sound of heavy-duty zip ties ratcheting shut echoed through the first-class cabin. "My epaulets!" Stevens cried out as the agents roughed him up slightly, disheveling his uniform. "I want my union rep. I want the pilots' union." "You'll get a lawyer when we get to the holding facility," Thorne said. "Get him off the plane." As they dragged the captain down the aisle, the passengers, who had initially been annoyed by the delay, were now witnessing the most exciting drama of their lives. Phones were held high, capturing every frame of the captain's humiliation. Then it was Brenda's turn. She wasn't shouting. She was hyperventilating. The reality of what she had done was crashing down on her. She looked at Marcus, her eyes wide and wet with tears. "Please," she whispered. "Sir, Agent Sterling, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Marcus stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, just enough to make her flinch. "That's the problem, Brenda," Marcus said softly. "You didn't know I was an agent. But you didn't need to know that to treat me like a human being. You treated me like a criminal because of how I looked. If I had been a regular passenger, a teacher, a nurse, a father, you would have ruined my life tonight. You would have had me arrested, put on a no-fly list and fired from my job. You wouldn't have cared." He leaned in closer. "The only difference tonight is that I have the power to hit back." Brenda sobbed, her knees buckling. Agent Thorne didn't offer any sympathy. "Get her up," she ordered her team. Two agents hoisted Brenda up by her arms. As they marched her toward the door, she looked at the passengers in first class, desperate for an ally. She locked eyes with Mr. Henderson in seat 1C. "Mr. Henderson," she pleaded, "you saw it. You said he was dangerous. Tell them." Henderson, realizing that speaking up now would likely implicate him in a federal investigation, looked straight down at his shoes. "I didn't see anything," he muttered. Brenda screamed as she was hauled out of the plane and into the rainy night. Once they were gone, Agent Thorne turned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this aircraft is being impounded for evidence processing. We have a replacement aircraft waiting at gate K-12. A customer service team is there to issue you all travel vouchers for the inconvenience." She looked at Marcus. "We have a secure transport waiting for you on the tarmac, Marcus. Director Davis wants a debrief at the field office before you head home." Marcus nodded. He grabbed his duffel bag from the overhead bin, the same bag Brenda had accused him of stealing. He threw it over his shoulder. As he walked down the aisle toward the exit, the cabin was dead silent. But as he passed row 4, a young woman began to clap. Then a man in row 5. Within seconds, the entire plane was applauding. It wasn't just applause. It was a release of tension, a cheer for justice served cold. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just walked out into the rain, ready to finish what Brenda Vance had started. The interrogation room at O'Hare's DHS substation was designed to make people uncomfortable. The walls were cinder block, painted a peeling shade of institutional grey. The air conditioner hummed loudly, keeping the room at a frigid 60 degrees. There were no windows, just a steel table and 3 metal chairs. Captain Richard Stevens sat on one side of the table. He had been stripped of his belt, his shoelaces, and his tie. He looked small. The arrogance that had filled the cockpit was gone, replaced by the shaky terror of a man realizing his life was over. The door buzzed and opened. Marcus Sterling walked in, holding a thick file folder. He was followed by a man in a sharp grey suit, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Ross. Ross was known in Chicago as the Shark for his ruthlessness in prosecuting federal crimes. Marcus sat down opposite Stevens. Ross stood by the door, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Water?" Marcus offered, sliding a plastic cup across the table. Stevens stared at it. "I want to go home." "I know," Marcus said calmly. "But you're not going home tonight, Richard. In fact, based on what we've found in the last hour, you might not be going home for a very long time." "This is insane," Stevens stammered. "I made a judgment call. I thought you were a security risk. You were unkempt. You were aggressive." "Aggressive?" Marcus opened the file. "I have the audio from the cockpit voice recorder, Richard. We pulled it 10 minutes ago." Stevens went pale. "What?" "The CVR," Marcus repeated. "It records everything said in the cockpit, including your conversation with Brenda before I even boarded." Marcus tapped a tablet on the table. A grainy but clear audio recording filled the room. Voice of Brenda. "Looks like they're letting anyone in first class these days. Look at the guy in the hoodie in the queue. Probably a drug dealer or a rapper." Voice of Stevens. "Don't worry, honey. If he gives you any lip, we'll toss him. I'm not hauling trash to D.C. tonight." Marcus stopped the recording. The silence in the room was deafening. "Trash," Marcus said, the word hanging in the air. "That's premeditated, Richard. You decided to kick me off before I even stepped on the plane. You didn't react to a security threat. You conspired to create one." Attorney Ross spoke up from the corner. "That's a violation of 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 241, Captain. Conspiracy against rights. 10 years in federal prison. Plus, filing a false report to the FAA. Another 5 years." Stevens put his head in his hands. I have a pension. I'm 2 years from retirement." "Your pension is gone," Ross said cheerfully. "The airline's morals clause kicks in the moment you are indicted for a felony. You're fired, Richard, effective immediately." Stevens looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Please, I have a mortgage. My wife. You should have thought about your wife before you weaponized the police against a federal agent," Marcus said, his voice void of pity. "But here is the twist, Richard, and this is the part you're really going to hate." Marcus flipped a page in the file. "I wasn't just flying home. I lied to you on the plane. I am an auditor, yes. But I've been investigating your airline for 6 months. We've had reports of racial profiling on this specific route for a long time." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes boring into Stevens. "I was the bait, Richard, and you took it hook, line, and sinker. Every move you made, every lie you told, every procedure you violated, it was all documented. You didn't just ruin your own career. You exposed your airline to a massive Department of Justice lawsuit. Their stock dropped 4% in after-hours trading just because the news of your arrest leaked." Stevens looked like he was going to vomit. "Now," Marcus said, closing the file, "we're going to bring Brenda in, and I'm going to give you a choice. You can go down for everything: the conspiracy, the assault charge, the false reporting, or what?" Stevens whispered. Or you tell us everything, Marcus said. We know Brenda has done this before. We know she has a side business selling confiscated items from passengers she kicks off. We've been tracking her finances. If you testify against her, if you admit that she instigated this and you just went along with it, we might recommend a plea deal. You'll still lose your license. You'll still be fired. But maybe you don't die in prison. Stevens didn't hesitate. The loyalty of the cockpit evaporated instantly in the face of survival. She told me to do it, Stevens blurted out. She said she wanted his seat for her boyfriend who was flying standby in economy. She said if we kicked the guy in 1A off, she could move her boyfriend up. That's why she did it. It wasn't just racism, it was fraud. Marcus and Attorney Ross exchanged a look. Fraud, Marcus said, a small smile finally touching his lips. Now that makes this a whole lot more interesting. Marcus stood up. Keep writing, Richard. Don't stop until you run out of ink. He walked out of the room, leaving the broken captain to write his own confession. In the hallway, Brenda Vance was sitting on a bench, handcuffed to a metal rail. She looked up as Marcus exited. Her mascara was running down her face. He's talking, Brenda, Marcus said as he walked past her. He's telling us about the boyfriend and the standby scam. Brenda's scream of rage echoed through the hallway as Marcus walked toward the exit, his phone buzzing with a call from the director. The night was far from over. The interrogation room where Brenda Vance sat was different from the captain's. It was smaller, hotter, and smelled faintly of ammonia. She had been stripped of her airline scarf, her jacket, and her dignity. Her mascara had dried into black streaks down her cheeks. She was still clinging to the hope that this was all a misunderstanding. Surely, she thought, the airline will protect me. I'm a senior employee. I have union rights. The door opened. It wasn't Marcus Sterling who entered. It was Agent Jessica Thorne, followed by a man Brenda recognized instantly. It was Gary. Gary was Brenda's boyfriend of 6 months. He was a personal trainer she had met at a gym in Chicago, younger, fit, and the man she was desperately trying to impress. He was wearing a tight t-shirt and looked utterly terrified, flanked by 2 armed federal officers. "Gary?" Brenda gasped, standing up, the handcuffs clinking against the table. "Gary, tell them. Tell them I was just trying to get us to D.C. for the weekend." Gary didn't look at her. He looked at the floor. He looked at the wall. He looked anywhere but at Brenda. "Sit down, Miss Vance," Agent Thorne commanded. Brenda sat, her eyes fixed on Gary. "Gary, why aren't you saying anything?" Agent Thorne placed a document on the table. "We just interviewed Mr. Gary Wilson here. He was waiting at the gate for you to clear up the seat situation. He claims he had no knowledge that you intended to frame a passenger to get him an upgrade." Thorne leaned in. "Is that true, Brenda? Or was Gary part of the conspiracy?" Brenda looked at Gary, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for him to say, "No, we did this together. I love her." Gary finally looked up. His eyes were cold. "I didn't know she was going to call the cops on a guy, Agent. She just texted me and said, 'I'm clearing seat 1A. Get ready to board.' I thought she meant the seat was empty. I didn't know she was going to ruin some dude's life." "Gary!" Brenda screamed. "I did it for you. You said you'd never flown first class. I wanted to give you a surprise." "A surprise?" Gary scoffed, his fear turning into anger. "You got arrested by Homeland Security, Brenda. I'm being questioned by the FBI. Do you know what this does to my reputation? I have clients. I can't be associated with a racist Karen who attacks federal agents." The words hit Brenda harder than the handcuffs. "Racist Karen." "I'm breaking up with you," Gary said, standing up. "I already told the agents everything you texted me. I gave them your phone unlock code. I'm done." "No!" Brenda wailed, reaching out, but the chain on her cuffs snapped taut. "Gary, don't leave me here," Agent Thorne signaled the officers. "Get Mr. Wilson out. He's a witness for the prosecution now." As the door slammed shut on Gary, leaving Brenda alone with Agent Thorne, the reality finally set in. She had lost her job. She had lost her freedom. And now, the man she had committed the crime for had turned on her to save his own skin. Thorne sat down and opened a laptop. She turned the screen toward Brenda. "And it gets worse, Brenda," Thorne said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Mr. Henderson, the passenger in 1C who you thought was on your side, he uploaded his video to Twitter 20 minutes ago. It has 2 million views." On the screen, Brenda saw herself. The video was clear. It showed her screaming, lying about being pushed, and mocking Marcus's clothes. The comments scrolling underneath were brutal. "Fire her immediately. She belongs in jail." Imagine being this arrogant to a DHS agent. Rest in peace to her career. "The airline just issued a press release," Thorne read from her phone. "Liberty Air condones zero tolerance for discrimination or dishonesty. Ms. Brenda Vance has been terminated for cause, effective immediately, and we are cooperating fully with federal prosecutors." Brenda put her head on the metal table and let out a long, guttural howl of despair. The karma wasn't just hitting her, it was crushing her. The air inside the Dirksen Federal Courthouse in downtown Chicago was heavy, thick with the scent of floor wax and the nervous sweat of the accused. Outside, a thunderstorm was brewing, mirroring the mood inside courtroom 402. This wasn't just a trial, it had become a national spectacle. The first-class profiling case had dominated the news cycle for months. What started as a rude flight attendant trying to sneak her boyfriend an upgrade had unraveled into a massive exposure of systemic negligence within Liberty Air. Marcus Sterling sat in the front row of the gallery, his posture rigid. Today there was no hoodie, no Timberland boots, and no stubble. He was dressed in his full Department of Homeland Security dress uniform. The navy blue fabric was sharp, and the gold badge on his chest caught the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Beside him sat his wife, Sarah, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. On the other side of the aisle sat the defendants. Former Captain Richard Stevens looked like a shell of the man who had once commanded a Boeing 737. The silver hair that used to look distinguished now looked thin and frazzled. He sat slumped over the defense table, avoiding eye contact with the gallery. He knew his career was over. Today was just about finding out how much of his life he would lose along with it. But it was Brenda Vance who drew the most attention. She looked unrecognizable. The layers of makeup were gone, leaving her face pale and drawn. She wore a bright orange jumpsuit provided by the Metropolitan Correctional Center, where she had been held without bail due to the flight risk designated by the prosecution. Her eyes darted around the room frantically, looking for an ally. She looked at the back row of the gallery and froze. Sitting there, looking uncomfortable in a cheap suit, was Gary, her ex-boyfriend, the man she had committed the crime for. He wasn't there to support her. He was there because the prosecution had subpoenaed him as a character witness against her. He refused to even look in her direction, whispering to a young blonde woman sitting next to him. Brenda felt a bile rise in her throat. He brought a date, she realized with horror. To my sentencing. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The heavy oak door behind the bench swung open, and Judge Samuel Harrigan swept into the room. Harrigan was a legend in the federal circuit, a man known as the Hammer for his disdain for corruption and abuse of power. He didn't walk, he marched. He took his seat, adjusted his spectacles, and stared down at the two defendants over the rim of his glasses. The silence in the room was absolute. "We are here for the sentencing in the matter of United States versus Vance and Stevens," Judge Harrigan began, his voice low but vibrating with authority. "I have read the pre-sentencing reports. I have watched the video evidence recorded by Mr. Henderson, and I have reviewed the extensive testimony provided by Special Agent Sterling." The judge turned his gaze first to the former captain. "Richard Stevens, please stand." Stevens stood up, his legs shaking visibly. "Mr. Stevens," the judge said, his tone filled with disappointment, "you held a position of supreme trust. A captain is the ultimate authority in the sky. Passengers trust you with their lives, but on that night, you abdicated that responsibility. Instead of de-escalating a conflict, you chose to protect a toxic culture. You conspired to file a false federal report, claiming a security threat where none existed, simply to appease a subordinate." Stevens looked down at his shoes. I just wanted a smooth flight, Your Honor." "No," Harrigan snapped. "You wanted an easy way out, and in doing so, you weaponized the police against a man who outranked you in every possible way." Harrigan opened a folder. "The Federal Aviation Administration has already permanently revoked your pilot's license. You will never fly again. But that is not punishment enough for the felony of conspiracy against rights. I sentence you to 30 months in federal prison to be served immediately. Following your release, you will pay a fine of $75,000 to cover the cost of the police operation you falsely triggered." Stevens let out a ragged breath, closing his eyes as the reality of 2.5 years in a cell washed over him. He slumped back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "Brenda Vance," Judge Harrigan called out. "Stand up." Brenda scrambled to her feet. She was trembling so hard the chains on her ankles rattled against the chair legs. "Miss Vance," the judge said, taking off his glasses to look her directly in the eye. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a display of arrogant entitlement." "I didn't mean to," Brenda sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I was just stressed. I made a mistake." "A mistake is spilling coffee," Harrigan interrupted, his voice booming like thunder. "What you did was a calculated assault on a man's dignity and liberty. You profiled a passenger based on his appearance. You decided that a black man in a hoodie could not possibly belong in first class, and when he proved you wrong with a valid ID, you didn't apologize. You doubled down." The judge leaned forward, his face hardening. "You lied to your captain. You lied to the police. You claimed assault when none occurred. You were willing to send an innocent man to jail, ruin his reputation, and destroy his life, just so you could steal his seat for your boyfriend." The judge gestured to the back of the room. "A boyfriend, I might add, who testified that you planned this entire charade via text message before the passenger even boarded." Brenda turned to look at Gary, her eyes pleading. Gary just looked at the ceiling, unbothered. "Your actions were not just rude, Ms. Vance," the judge continued. "They were criminal. You violated Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You abused your position as a flight crew member to terrorize a passenger." "Please," Brenda wailed. "I have a daughter. I'll lose my house." "You should have thought about your house when you tried to take away Agent Sterling's freedom," Harrigan said, cold as ice. "Brenda Vance, I sentence you to 60 months, 5 full years in federal prison. There will be no possibility of early parole." Gasps erupted from the gallery. 5 years was a heavy sentence. "Furthermore," the judge added, raising his voice to be heard over the noise, "upon your release, you are hereby placed on the National No-Fly List for life. You abused the privilege of the skies, and you will never set foot on an airplane again. "No!" Brenda screamed, her legs giving out. "You can't do this! I can't go to prison!" 2 U.S. Marshals moved in immediately. They grabbed Brenda by her arms, hoisting her up as she kicked and screamed, begging for Gary, begging for the airline, begging for anyone to help her. "Court is adjourned," Judge Harrigan said, banging his gavel with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. Marcus watched as Brenda was dragged out the side door, her wails fading into the corridor. He didn't feel happy. He didn't feel joyful. He felt a deep, solemn sense of balance being restored. He stood up and adjusted his jacket. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Are you okay?" "I am now," Marcus said softly. They walked out of the courtroom and into the main atrium. The moment the double doors swung open, a wall of camera flashes blinded them. Dozens of reporters thrust microphones toward Marcus. "Agent Sterling! Agent Sterling! Do you feel justice was served?" "Agent, what do you say to Liberty Air's stock crashing today?" Marcus stopped. He raised a hand, and the press gaggle went silent. He looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera, his expression stern. "Brenda Vance and Richard Stevens aren't the only ones on trial today," Marcus said, his voice steady and projecting authority. "Every person in a uniform, every person with a little bit of power who thinks they can judge someone by the color of their skin or the clothes on their back. They were on trial, too." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "They looked at me and saw a thug. They didn't look close enough to see the badge. Let this be a lesson to everyone. Humility costs you nothing. But arrogance will cost you everything." He turned to his wife. "Let's go home, Sarah." "Are we flying?" a reporter shouted from the back. Marcus cracked a rare, genuine smile. "No, I think I'll drive. I like to keep my feet on the ground." As Marcus Sterling walked out into the rain-cleansed streets of Chicago, he left behind the wreckage of 2 careers and the heavy silence of a justice system that, for once, had worked exactly as it was supposed to. And that is how a routine flight to D.C. turned into a 5-year prison sentence. Brenda Vance thought her uniform gave her the right to bully a passenger, but she learned the hard way that you never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is a federal agent with the power to audit your entire existence. Justice was slow, but it was absolute. Brenda lost her freedom, the captain lost his wings, and Marcus Sterling proved that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. What do you think? Was 5 years in prison too harsh, or did Brenda get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you loved this story of karma hitting back instantly, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. I post new stories of justice and drama every single week. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.